Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Greg Hutchins. Good morning.
Hey, Greg. When we're just getting set up to record this thing, you're talking about risk and risk management. Oh, and by the way, I got your newsletter in the mail. It's only been like 5 years that for whatever reason, your email server was not talking to my email server. And I'd complain to you every couple of years about it. So finally, it only took moving your entire system to something else, I understand. But thanks for making that work for me.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
But anyway, I mean, you mentioned something that caught my eye was, and you've talked about it in the past with me, is risk-based decision-making, and how do you look at the world as risk-based? And we talk about reliability engineering as we craft a product or a system, or we make decisions, and it's fraught with uncertainty because it's looking into the future. It's one of those things in reliability they don't teach you in statistics, is that in basic regression analysis, for example, they say only draw conclusions within the bounds of your data, right? Mm-hmm. So in reliability, the first thing you do is you take your system and you run it for 6 months, and then you predict 6 years what it's going to do, well beyond your data. And so we extrapolate, not willy-nilly, but regularly. It's just a part of our job. And that has a lot of risk associated with just the techniques and the assumptions we're making and the data we're collecting and types of analysis we're doing. But there's also, do we go with vendor A, vendor B, or do we do this or that, the other thing? So we're making decisions and observations that feed into a larger risk management system. And so informally, you and I have talked over the years, so I feel like I've picked up quite a bit of that. But you were talking about, how do we convince people they need training in this stuff?
So for many years, we did bottom-up type of training. And there's a new pattern, a new development coming down the road. And I'm wondering if this is isolated. So let me provide the context. A large company, large utility, electric power, they got a couple of nuke plants. They're living in the world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the board is worried, the board of the company. The board is working in a very risky environment. Their systems, their nuke plants are going to be closed. The high voltage transmission lines were built for 60 years life. They're approaching 80. And the generation side of the business can't meet demand.
Well, you got to move to California, because I think there was like 4 or 5 minutes a couple of weeks ago that the California Energy Commission said that we were running the state's electric system completely on renewable energy, but it was only like for 5 minutes. Apparently one plant was shut down and overlapped with another one, and it had to go all renewables. But I digress.
Interestingly, this is not a story about PG&E or SoCal Edison. This is some other utility. But the board was very concerned because they thought they had enough energy to run this year without any brownouts or blackouts. But they did the numbers. They didn't have enough generation, meaning power generation, to meet demand. And the board was thinking, gee, what are we going to do? So aside from bringing in peak load generation, which basically means that you're running a gas turbine with natural gas when there's a high demand for heat or high demand for cooling, and you're not going to run that base load, which means this sort of general, type of energy.
Well, there's another option. I'm sure they thought about it, is the battery systems that are peak shaving systems. I've run into a few of those over the years of companies that, during the off cycles of power demand, is they keep the plants running at a a modicum of generation, and then you just store it. Whether it's pumping water up the hill in the dam or it's putting it in great big liquid batteries that are amazing amount of power capacity in these things, as opposed to burning more natural gas.
Well, in this case, the utility decided to burn, and it's an IOU, investor-owned utility, decided to basically run their peaks on natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
And the environmental community went crazy. And, basically were justified because the State Utility Commission said, you're going to be running in 5 years largely out of solar and wind.
Right.
So here's the problem. The company, large utility, had hired people, promoted them, nurtured them, and rewarded them for one set of behaviors: keep the system running. And now they needed a different type of mentality. The problem is a lot of the utilities were 20, 30, 40-year-old long timers, and they couldn't change their behaviors. So the utility came to us and said, gee, we want the whole company to do risk-based decision making. Many thousands of people. And the question was, how do we do it? And by the way, this is still a question the utility is facing. And as an outsider, we're a small company. We can't train thousands of people. We'd love to make a lot of money, but we just simply didn't have the bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
So we advised the company about what to do and maybe how to do it. And we're still doing that. So the challenge is, and what I saw was a repeat of 1987. So in the quality world, reliability world, 1987 was pivotal. We had the Baldrige National Quality Award. We had Lean Six Sigma from Motorola, and we had ISO 9001. And I was thinking, is 2022 going to become the same equivalent for risk-based thinking, risk-based decision-making? Meaning the Full Employment Act for a lot of us.
Well, there was something on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago or last week about the definition of risk in risk management in ISO, the various ISO standards, and not being consistent, which I think was valid point, saying, well, hey, what are you guys talking about here? And they're written by different committees at different times. So I understand why it happens, but it's like, it's not helping. But I think, I don't know. I don't think it's a pivotal point. I think it's more of a transform, is that the awareness of that the world around us is changing. And it always has been, right? It's just that we got away with the same behavior and same activity of maximize profit or ship the product or, do those kinds of things for decades and decades and decades. And we kind of learned those patterns. It took the auto industry, a long time to figure out they actually had to make a car that worked before they could sell another one. And so it took a long time for them to get that into their DNA. But I think the larger world is, especially ones that we don't have a lot of competition on a day-to-day basis. Now the environment's competing with us is just one way to look at it. Is the amount of things we plug in is creating so much demand. More people are putting in air conditioners, creating more demand. More factories are moving back to the U.S., putting more demand. Somebody puts up a steel plant, there goes your energy consumption woes. You're going to be using a lot of energy for like an aluminum plant. It's great having the jobs, but you're going to have brownouts because they're going to feed the airport, the hospital, and the aluminum plant before that you get your air conditioner. The forces, I think, are changing that we have to, and it's more of a problem for change management, I think, than it is of risk management. I think we just need to think about and react to and anticipate the world around us in ways we're just not comfortable doing. The way you painted that picture for this utility is, see it's that way. Whether you call it risk management or not, I think we got to change the way we filter our own decision making.
at the individual level.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Right.
And we're not ready for that. I mean, I'll give you another data point. Historically, and I've spent many, many years in the power business, there would normally be maybe once 20 years, maybe once in 10 years, a blackout, uh, especially 30 years ago. The equipment was very good. The high voltage transmission lines were 10 years old. Now we're running these things to failure, everything to failure. That's nice. That's a reliability concept. That's very
Yeah,
foreign.
it's actually a strategy, but it's not very useful when your entire system is wearing out at the same time.
That's exactly right. But the utility mentality was run to failure
Yep.
and then replace. Totally opposite to predictive reliability, predictive maintenance. But now the significance of that is having an impact on all of us, especially if gasoline becomes $10 a gallon, which it could be, which is another talk for another
Yep.
time. But here, there was I mean, I'm sort of a geek and I'm still in the energy business, but there was an article from the feds that said 75% of America will have a brownout or blackout this year. Now, 20 years ago, in our system in the Northwest, we would have a brownout or blackout maybe every 10 years. Now, three-quarters of the U.S. is going to have some type of reliability failure, almost like a third world country.
Well, is that a reliability problem or just a lack of capacity of infrastructure to deliver and not anticipating the demand? I think utilities just got caught by the demand, combined with, more air conditioning, but just there's more things plugged in. I can't, the amount of power my house consumes is, I don't know how many fold larger than it was 20 years ago. And I got computers and hard drives and smart devices, this, that, and the other, and backup drives, and not to mention a big screen TV. I got LED lights and energy conserving dishwasher, but that doesn't more than make up for just to have way more things plugged in.
And don't forget electric cars, EVs.
Oh yeah. By the way.
By the way, yeah, exactly.
But I think part of it is the onset of EVs, just the computers in general, and gaming systems. They just burn through power. You can heat your house with a good Xbox. But I mean, I think that it's not just consumers. I think we're a part of the problem, but I think it's also just the onshoring of more companies and more factories and more facilities and more mining and all those kinds of high energy uses. I mean, for decades, we've been getting rid of steel plants. They've been moving offshore, and that's reversing. We're bringing more of that stuff back, and that's huge. Bitcoin. Mining for cryptocurrency is, in some parts of the country, is like the number one energy consumer.
Yep.
So I think some of it is the forecasting. It's not a clean, flat pattern that's following the trend from the last 30 years. That's changing faster than they can react. And we're shutting down nuclear plants. And we want to switch the solar, which has solar and renewable energy, which has all kinds of variability that a coal plant never had. Mm-hmm. Right? So there's tons of factors at play here. But the idea is that it all comes back to the individuals in the system saying, hey, we got to recognize this pattern. We got to foresee this. Just because we've always been using, year over year rolling average, it's not the right measure anymore to forecast what our energy needs are for next year. It's just that we're missing the mark. And we're not taking action quick enough to put in capacity or contingencies or whatever to deal with it. And so part of it is how we're making decisions. And I think what the idea here is that we're not taking into account those uncertainties in a way that allows us to change our behavior of what data we collect, what analysis we do, and what decisions we make. And I think that's the heart of risk-based decision making, is that you got to consider the bigger picture a lot more deliberately than you may have been comfortable doing in the past.
And the interdependencies between the factors.
Yeah.
So let me add a human touch to it. You're making maybe, you're an outside board, independent director of a board in a utility.
Yeah, like all of us on our listeners are, that's what we do. No. I hope there's a few of you that become board members, and maybe a couple are, but let's say we're in that spot. We're making big decisions, big picture decisions.
That's right. And you've got a shackle, you know what a shackle is, on a high voltage transmission line that was put up 100 years ago, and the shackle fails. Stress strain, the thing just simply falls apart, and it drops a high voltage transmission line in Northern California.
Well, that's not a good thing.
Causes a fire and hits a town called Paradise. And unfortunately, Paradise got vaporized. And it was very unfortunate. Some people lost their lives. California basically took criminal measures against the company, PG&E, and went after senior management and went after the board for dereliction and blah, 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 bunch of reasons. And all of a sudden,
all these other boards are saying, oh, wait a minute here.
That's the truth. Yeah, exactly. Do we want to put up a nuke plant? How are we going to generate electricity? And they're not making decisions. And not making a decision is a decision.
Yeah, I was just going to say is that, not making a decision is they're going to have brownouts. But that's a decision.
That's exactly right.
But you don't go to jail for not having power.
Not yet. Not yet. So here we've got senior executives, or maybe even executives in the utility, that know that the system is coming apart. They can't provide energy to hospitals. They can't provide energy to stoplights. They can't provide energy to EVs or to refrigerators that have 3 weeks worth of food.
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be liable, personally liable?
Well, I know from personal experience. I live in the mountainous regions. Most of the country we just call them hills. But it's apparently there is a process where if you lose your refrigerator full of food due to a power outage, you can file a claim with the power company and they'll reimburse you to some extent. But there's so many conditions and caveats and everything else on it. I've only heard of one person ever that's gotten reimbursed 10% of what they perceived value is. So the bureaucracy just made it near impossible to deal with. So there are other solutions to those problems, I guess.
So let me ask you a question. Is running to failure in the utility business a correct decision?
Oh, I would say no, especially when, where did I see it? I think you were talking about it or somebody. No, I was talking to Chris Jackson about it. It was, there was a long-term study of power poles in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And the types of technology they were using, whether they're concrete or wood or treated or not treated, different types of treatment, and which ones lasted the longest. And so they had all this great data, and they were doing the analysis of it and sorting it out. And then they came to the realization that like 2/3 of their system is near the end of their useful life, and we're likely going to need to be repaired, and they don't have enough trees that would fit the bill to go do this, kind of thing. It's so easy to react to a failure today. You can roll a truck, you go make the fix, and we're back up and running, or we avert a disaster, or it doesn't take our whole system down, or does these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Looking at that 4 years from now, 2/3 of our system is going to be needing to replace it is just too big of a problem to have to go worry about. I can solve the problem today by rolling a truck today, whereas solving the problem when 2/3 of our system needs replacing, that's outside my scope, man. That's not my problem. And so some of it is that it's not part of their job title. I think that's what this board is asking you guys to do is say, hey, no, you need to flag this and raise this, and we need to think about this and solve these bigger problems. Think differently is to use the Apple ad campaign.
Yep, I remember.
Right. But the idea is that that is hard to do. That's a cultural change. That's not just a new framework for how to make decisions and different sets of data to consider. Here's some ways to consider it. Here's things to think about. Here's factors to weight. And here's, different ways to make decisions. But that won't make a difference at all unless it's supported all the way through the organization, and it's just a cultural change. And that in some companies will take decades, unfortunately.
You're right. It'll take decades. But now the window of opportunity to make differences is probably 5 years to make systemic, behavioral, fundamental changes. Now, again, I'm only talking about utilities, transmission, generation.
But the same thing goes in every industry, in every facility. And we've got new technologies coming along all the time. We're all facing just a more turbulent world than it was 3 years ago, between COVID and supply chains and inflation and on and on and on. Yeah, we've always had things we got to worry about and take care of and solve. But the pace of change, which is now becoming a trite phrase, is just picking up. So I don't know. Is training the only solution? Is it bigger than just training? Is it cultural change?
I think it's going to be cultural, systemic mind shift change. And the question is, when people have been there for 20, 30, 40 years and have one set of behaviors that have been reinforced, how do you change behaviors quickly?
Change how they get paid. Seriously, I've seen it work in organizations. You change the bonus structure for mid and senior managers such that warranty costs play a factor is equally or more important than you shipped it on time. All of a sudden, you get better products. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It was within a year. There was a dramatic change.
At HP?
Yeah.
Maybe you're right.
It's funny how people are like that. They kind of do what they're paid to do.
Yes. So, is there going to be an opportunity like 1987 where everybody was being trained and rewarded for quality? Is 2022 going to be the same for risk-based thinking and risk-based decision making? I don't know. Yeah. Could be the Full Employment Act for all of us.
Well, we'll see what happens. I think it's another topic for us is to talk about how ISO's playing into this, the standards bodies, because I think they're kind of mucking it up a bit. But that's the topic for another day.
Next one.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this, I mean, we ranged quite a broad range of things, but the scenario of, if you're in a utility and you got to make different decisions and how do you improve the decision making or change it so that it's risk based and it's factoring in these elements that are changing in and around our systems and of our systems and the way we make decisions. There's a lot of stuff here we just don't have time to talk about in this podcast, but there's plenty of other topics there. And I'd be very curious of what you as the listener would be interested in hearing about. It's Greg and I and the other hosts explore kind of how do we respond to and get ahead of all these changes that are occurring and how it factors into what we do on a day-to-day basis within our organizations and even in our personal lives. Mm-hmm. So head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR and let us know. You can leave us a message there. You can find Greg and I and the other hosts of the show on LinkedIn or on our About pages on Accendo. There's plenty of ways for you to get in touch with us.
Absolutely, Fred. And our job, yours and mine, is really to help the listener thrive in a complex world.
Yep, well said. All right. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.